Hello, everyone. I'm Cody Douglas, and today I'll be talking about the less technical aspects of caffeine, such as the origin and sources of caffeine, the function of caffeine, and research on caffeine. As a source, I'm using Bennett Allen Weinberg and Bonnie K. Beeler's The World of Caffeine, the Science and Culture of the World's Most Popular Drug. All of the information that I'm about to discuss was collected in that book. I think this information flows best if seen through the lens of known history, so I'll talk about the history and uses of the three most common natural sources of caffeine: coffee, tea, and chocolate, before I discuss some of the research focused around the drug. To begin, I'll talk about the history and uses of caffeine. Although some legends place the origin of the coffee plant in Ethiopia, the first written reference to coffee may have come from the Arabian physician and astronomer Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zachariah el-Razi between 852 and 932 AD. El-Razi wrote of a plant called bun and a drink made from it called bunchum in his lost medical book, Al-Hawaii. The description of the beans and the drink he offered in this book supposedly match coffee fairly well, but as Al-Hawaii is a lost book, we cannot know if or when El-Razi was describing coffee. The first verifiable reference to coffee still comes from Arabia, this time from Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Abdullah ibn Sina's Al-Ghanum fit Teb, otherwise known as the Canon of Medicine. As the canon was completed in 1025, I think we can conclude that people knew about coffee and some of its effects at least a little while before then, if the bean and drink they reference are actually coffee, though it is still possible that El-Razi and Sina are referring to some other substance with similar effects, as neither of their descriptions mentions coffee's energizing effect. Despite our knowledge of the pleasant effects of caffeine through coffee, the drink coffee remains obscure and is perhaps even lost until the beginning of the 16th century. It is then that Sufi scholars in, or at least near, Yemen began using coffee for its energizing effect. By 1510, it was commonly used as a stimulant across much of the Islamic world. Although coffee was occasionally banned due to suspicion surrounding its psychoactive effect, it proved popular enough as a source of caffeine to be consumed around the world. The source of caffeine that I'll be discussing here is tea. The earliest known reference to tea and its effects through caffeine comes from the physician Hua Tuo's book The Shin Lun, which was written in 220 BC, although the practice of consuming tea leaves may have originated from India. Specifically, Tuo is said to have noted that tea improves alertness and concentration. So, like with the coffee in the Middle East, tea was being consumed due to the stimulating effect of the caffeine it contains. However, a dictionary known as the Urya, which was probably from the 3rd or 4th century BC, recommends that tea is used to treat digestive issues and nervousness without mentioning the pleasant effects of the drug. Simply put, tea was seen mostly as a medicine in early Chinese history. This perception of tea as a strictly medicinal substance changed at least by the 4th century, when tea was seen both as a curative and an enjoyable drink. The consumption of tea as a beverage hasn't changed too much since then, as it is still mostly consumed as a beverage, though it may be worth noting that some other cultures outside of China experience the psychoactive effects of tea through other means. For example, a delicacy called letpet was made in Burma by stuffing tea leaves into a bamboo shoot, burying it for a few months, then digging it up for consumption at a special occasion. Despite the long-standing popularity of tea in China and other Eastern nations, tea only arrived in the West in the early 17th century. The last common source of caffeine I'll be discussing here is cacao, otherwise known as chocolate. It appears the Olmecs of coastal Mexico, who existed from 1500 to 400 BC, were the first people to harvest cacao and refine it into a beverage, though it is hard to know more about their relationship with cacao due to their lack of remaining records. We'll have to look to the Maya, who existed in some form from 1000 BC to 900 AD, to see how people interacted with cacao in the Americas. Cacao was not only used for its stimulating properties among the Maya, they also used it as a currency. Another civilization that put cacao to use was the Aztecs, who used it as a luxury good and as an alternative to alcohol. Aztec citizens were allowed to drink alcohol, but its use was heavily restricted due to laws that prevented younger people from consuming it, and even made public intoxication a capital offense that normally resulted in execution. And using chocolate as a stimulating drink, Aztecs were able to find a safer alternative to alcohol that still gave them a psychoactive effect. Additionally, cacao had something of a holy connotation in Aztec society. It was believed to be a gift from the god Quetzalcoatl, and the king Montezuma II even ended his banquets by drinking abutal, a drink brewed from the roasted cacao beans, to gain strength and inspiration from Quetzalcoatl. Since then, cacao has been introduced to other parts of the world. Although Columbus was the first person to bring cacao back to Europe in 1502, it was the conquistador Hernán Cortés who, in a letter to King Charles V of Spain, informed Europeans of the stimulating effects of cacao. While the newly introduced cacao would later be primarily consumed as a solid rather than a liquid, and didn't have a religious association in Europe, it is worth noting that even Cortés introduced cacao to the Spanish as the drink of the gods. More than anything else, I believe this quote demonstrates how people around the world view caffeine when they first gain access to it. Now that I have covered the origin and sources of caffeine, such as coffee, tea, and cacao, and covered their function as a stimulant within different cultures, I would like to briefly focus on the research conducted on caffeine. The discovery of caffeine was made by the German physician Friedrich Ferdinand Runge in 1819, after he received Arabian mocha beans from the German baron Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. When meeting Goethe, Runge supposedly impressed him by dropping belladonna extract into his cat's eye, which caused it to dilate. Runge's routine with his cat evidently impressed Goethe, who gifted him with the mocha beans to study as a way of thanking him for the display. Runge discovered the stimulant caffeine in the beans and named its finding after the German word for coffee, Kaffee. With the discovery of the psychoactive element in coffee, and later tea and cocoa, researchers took an interest in understanding the effect this common, socially acceptable drug has on our health. As you might suspect, the consumption of caffeine appears to have some benefits and some detriments. Research indicates that, among the average person, acute caffeine consumption leads to temporarily elevated levels of blood pressure, cortisol, free fatty acid levels, urination, and gastric secretions, though these increased levels do not appear to have a permanent detrimental effect on one's health, nor do they appear among regular caffeine consumers. Additionally, research has reaffirmed the fact that caffeine is a psychoactive drug with the potential to produce addiction. It is possible to develop a tolerance to caffeine, just as it is possible to experience caffeine withdrawal. Non-morphological complications may also arise among newborns, as fetuses and neonates are limited in their ability to metabolize caffeine until 8 months after birth. With that said, the relationship between caffeine and birth defects is still uncertain due to the extraneous variables that can influence pregnancy, though doctors generally recommend that expecting mothers at least reduce their caffeine intake. In addition to the effects caffeine has on our bodies, it also influences our cognition. Caffeine has been found to improve performance during vigilance tasks, which are long time-consuming tasks that require attention but little physical exertion. Weinberg and Beeler's examination of multiple studies indicates that, generally, caffeine enhances performance while performing a simple, familiar task, but impairs performance during novel, complex tasks. Ultimately, while these studies on the effect of caffeine provide us with valuable information about the potential impact of caffeine on the aggregate population, it is worth remembering that these studies had low retest reliability and that individuals differ in their tolerance to caffeine. So what may be a useful amount of caffeine for one person may prove detrimental to another. And with that said, I will end my presentation on caffeine. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of my group's presentation.